Hi guys, I'm Antoine here, Director of Accounts and Strategy for Global RevGen. I'm here with Rob Brown, who you might know for his time at Navitas. He's agreed to take a bit of his time to answer a few questions for us, so thanks a lot, Rob, for being here with us.
It's a pleasure.
Today I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, what's your outlook for the higher education sector in general in Australia but overseas? How do you see that evolving through the years in the next 3, 5, maybe 10 years to come? If you could give us your thoughts on that, that'd be great.
I think the change was afoot in the higher education sector anyway. It was coming. I don't think there's a university out there that hasn't had these discussions internally about how do we adapt to the changing landscape, the digital landscape, the more mobile world that we live in, and the fact that the university model, particularly the 3-year bachelor and the 2-year or 1 to 2 year master's degree, was conceived for a different time when there was a real need for a certain number of people in that city or that part of that city with that particular skill to go and apply their knowledge and skills in whether it was managing factories or supply chains or whatever it was. And the world has obviously changed. And I think it's fair to say that universities have it's difficult to change when you're a 300-400-year-old institution or a 200-year-old institution if you're talking about the Australian context. And but I think what we're going to see, I think we'll look back in a couple of decades time and say that COVID was an accelerant rather than a change agent. What it did is it accelerated. If you look at the trends that were happening in the higher education sector, so a move to consuming lectures online rather than going into campus and sitting in a lecture theatre, blended learning models where with a lot more digital content. It's been going that way anyway, but I think COVID has brought forward the acceleration or sped up the acceleration by a decade, which means that and universities obviously everything's had to go online, but online today is Zoom or it's Microsoft Teams but that's not online delivery. I mean that's part of it, but it's not the so I think we're going to see a real acceleration. There's going to be a massive influx of capital into EdTech solutions. I mean, we've had these discussions for the last 15, 20 years about what does online learning look like, and nobody's really come up with the sort of format that's taken off like a rocket. There are different versions out there, and some of them being successful to varying degrees. But I think we are going to see a lot of innovation in that space, and I think universities, the universities that are really thinking about this from a almost looking to disrupt themselves, because I think that's what they're going to need to do. So that's one theme. I think the role of the generic university, I think that will be seriously challenged the longer this goes on. If you look at a market like Australia, 42, 43 universities, on the second Tuesday of March every year, you've got 43 lecturers teaching Economics 101, and yet 1 or 2 of them are absolutely the guns at that. And it might be somebody from Swinburne University. It might be, Mr. Jacobs, Bob Jacobs from Swinburne University, or it might be, Susie Catterall from Edith Cowan University. And I think we're going to see probably with universities a similar sort of thing that happened to the newspaper industry, where content will be syndicated. And in the 1980s, 90s even, pre-internet, every major publishing house, newspaper house had its foreign bureau in Moscow, Sarajevo, Tokyo, and you'd have, 300 journalists working for different papers writing about the same event that had happened in Moscow or happened in London or whatever. Today, that content is syndicated. So you open up the Sydney Morning Herald, and if you look at the bottom, you'll see it was syndicated from The Guardian, that particular article. Another one on the next page was syndicated from the Washington Post. So I think we're going to start to see that in the university sector, where it just doesn't make economic sense for 42, 43 universities to deliver the same content based essentially on the same day every single year. I think there'll be one or two or three superstar teachers and lecturers that will emerge. And we've seen this model, we've seen it in the ELICOS industry, the sort of ESL industry overseas, people like Kelly Mock in Hong Kong, an English teacher, young female English teacher, she's in her early 30s now, she earns about $5 million a year teaching English in Hong Kong. Advertised on buses, she's a superstar, she's like a pop star. There are a couple in Korea. But we're starting to see this in the higher ed sector. Norman Nemro from Brigham Young University, his accounting course, even Harvard Business School, they recommend their students take Brigham Young accounting elective because it's the best in class. So I think we're going to start seeing this as the model sort of starts to change and morph, break down, whichever adjective you want to use. I think we're going to start to see the rise of superstar teachers, and that's one. And then the other thing that I think, so the generic universities, I think there's going to be a need for universities to really start specializing, to being known for something, whether that's health sciences or whether that's, the best place to study architecture in Australia is University X, or accounting is University Y. So I think that's a trend. But I think the really big thing, and this is the real challenge to change, is the notion of a 3-year course where you pay up front, every year. You do a 3-year intensive course of study, and then that's it. You might do another year, you might do a master's degree, but then you're in the workforce and then off you go. You've got your career and that's what you train for. I think we all know that that's not the way the world works today. And there are still so many, governments and families and universities and other bodies that have propped up this model. And I think that model's going to come under real pressure now. And I think the notion of going to study in a building to acquire information for 3 years at a cost of $20,000 to $40,000 a year will just seem anachronistic when we look back. And so what is the model? What's the future? What's the alternative? And I think the relationship that a student has with their university, over time, I think it'll become a lifelong relationship. I think it'll be a long-term. So it might be that instead of paying $25,000 up front every year, you pay $500 a year, but you have a relationship with your university. You get special offers on this. You get short courses that you get invited to events. You get that are happening in your country. Or in your area. I think that notion of recurring revenue, my view is that's the future business model for universities, and I think a lot of them are going to struggle to get to that point, and it's not going to happen. It's not like somebody just flicks a switch to a new business model. There's going to need to be a transition, but as more and more of the big four auditing firms, the big tech companies like Google, Apple, are placing less emphasis now on where you went to university, where you went to college, and more on your resume, your experience. I think that opens the door for universities who are in the best position, arguably, to really step through that door and reinvent the future of adult education, probably not higher education. I think it's adult education that is, you might do a you might start your relationship with a university with a 3-month course, and then not do another course with that university for another 2 years. But it might be a 10-day course that you do next time. It might be an online course that you do the third time, but it's the same university that you've got that relationship with. And I think I think there are real opportunities there. There are for advocacy, for, learner gets learner, recruits other people from. So I think those are my views. So some big trends, and they're not easy. This is not going to be easy, but it's absolutely necessary in my view, because that cliff, that sharp drop off the cliff, has suddenly got 10 years closer.
And do you think that the current university reputation will play a part to the same extent that it does today in that new sort of that new landscape? Or
look, the established universities that have got global brands, will people still be lining up for an on-campus experience at Harvard University in 100 years? 100% yes. Right? The brands that have got, centuries in some case of brand equity, are the most likely to still be here in 100 years' time. But not necessarily. Some of those brands are the ones that will struggle to change. Some of the newer, more nimble universities that are far more progressive will actually find it more comfortable in this new world. Can we introduce a short course, non-accredited? Yes, we can. Let's do it. So I think there's going to be. I think it's going to be an interesting landscape to watch play out. But I think there will be some consolidation. There has to be consolidation. The question: do you need 42 universities, 43 universities in Australia, or 4,000 universities in the US? Look at the US example. There's going to be massive consolidation in that market. There's going to have to be, especially with the lower tier universities, because they're not all going to survive. So I think even in Australia, I think we will see some consolidation. There were talks pre-COVID with certain universities merging. I think those talks in some cases will be back on the table. I think we're all reading the same headlines around the loss of international student revenue. What's going to replace that? Are universities going to downsize? Are they going to, reinvent themselves as co-working spaces? Why wouldn't they? One of the big challenges in the cities now, in Australian cities, is, as we've seen, people are now working from home. That genie's out of the bottle, and a lot of people aren't going to go back 5 days a week. So the need for flexible workspace. That's the WeWork, the Regis model of flexible office spaces has been absolutely endorsed by COVID. The problem is that companies like WeWork and Regis are in the wrong parts of town. When the government's saying don't go into the city, or the boss is saying you don't need to come into the city anymore, that's not necessarily where I want my flexible working space. I think out in the suburbs, close to a 5-minute drive from where I live. I want to get out of home. I want to get out of my home to go and work somewhere. But which entities have got flexible or excess capacity out in the suburbs? And then the answer is universities is one of them. There's an opportunity for them to move into that space. And when you think about learning and work, which go hand in hand, I think there are definitely opportunities there. I think big tech as well, the big tech companies, we're going to start to see Google, Apple, in particular those two, Amazon potentially, but I think Google and Apple, we're going to start seeing some very significant partnerships. Google's already sort of moving into its own certification and own qualification So there's going to be some ripples there. But I think going back to what I said, as it's been said many times before, an opportunity, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And I think this is the time when, for a lot of universities that were meeting resistance from within, that no, we don't need to change. Now everybody realizes that this is the opportunity to drive through change, and I think that's a huge opportunity. So I don't worry too much about Australian universities. I think they'll be okay. I think Destination Australia is very, very, very assured. But we've got to get those borders and those vaccinations. The borders open, the vaccinations happening, because I think one of the risks in any of this is that out of sight, out of mind. And if the borders are closed for a couple of years, then there's a whole new sort of tourism, Destination Australia, promotional global marketing campaign that's going to need to happen to really get people back into the radar, because our competitors, Australia's competitors like the UK, like Canada, US, New Zealand even, are going to be, they're all having the same conversations, and so it's really time to play to our strengths, and we've got a hell of a lot of strengths down here. But I think there will be consolidation. I think that's inevitable. I think it's the borders. The borders may stay closed longer than a lot of people think, or it might take longer. They'll come back eventually, but will they come back to study the same types of courses? I think that's a question that universities should be asking themselves.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. Great insights there. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.